Philonesia Podcast.
Hello. What do we want to say today, Ian?
I'm not saying it, dude. Welcome. Fuck.
Velkommen.
Velkommen.
I think 2 episodes ago, we started saying Ohio, konbanwa.
Ohio. Konbanwa.
You talked about Big Bird Goes to Japan, but then you switched it to Big Bird Goes to China.
Did I really? Oh, man.
I switch my words all the time. I'm like, oh, God. I was going to make corrections. I'm like, there's too many. There's too many mistakes. People can deal with it.
Yeah, I think so. I think that a lot of the people that are listening like our mistakes and enjoy what we kind of say and do.
Well, we're not the best speakers, so it must be something else.
Definitely not the best of speakers over here.
Yeah.
Well, I'm Ian.
Yeah. I'm Philbert.
Hello, Philbert.
Hello. I'm standing in for Eric today.
Yeah. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Where is Eric?
He got punched in the mouth for speaking bad.
That's unfortunate.
I know. Yeah, you get the penalty.
Do you have any fun things we should engage in before we dive into our topic today?
Well, let's see. Critical Role, the show came out.
Oh, yeah.
So that's pretty cool.
Nice.
I think you've seen more than I have.
I haven't seen any yet.
You're going to watch that tonight?
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty good. It's funny. Much more mature. I mean, I guess Critical Role has always been mature, but it kind of presents itself intentionally or not as it's more family friendly, just like its branding and
right.
But it's really not.
It's not.
It's titties and fucks all the way.
And blood and gore, I hear.
Blood. Yeah. Well, the best part is after the big encounter in episode 1, Grog is like holding his rib cage, and for anybody who doesn't know, Grog is like the Goliath barbarian, classic punch him in the face type character. And then he pulls his hand away, and as you can see, like his ribs and blood just starts going. He's like, "Is this normal?" And everyone's like, "Oh my God!"
Nice. I'm super excited to watch it tonight. Super excited.
I think you'll like it. I mean, the selling point is all the players of Critical Role are voice actors, so they all get to voice act their characters.
Yeah.
So that's cool. And then like Mercer is a bunch of just weird characters, and he plays Trinket, which is the bear.
The bear? Nice. Oh, that's so great.
So it's cool. It's definitely a nice addition to the Critical Role universe.
Yeah, and I'm a pretty big fan of the universe that they've been creating, the Exandria and everything. I think it's a fun world. I think that there's a lot of cool stuff that they've put in there.
It took me a long time. I was not a fan. I didn't really get it, but Campaign 3 has definitely sold me. I like Campaign 3 a lot. I still don't care for any of the rest. I've tried.
Yeah.
And I will continue to try. It's not really my bag at this point, but I really like Mercer. I like all the people involved. I think they're pretty cool.
Oh yeah, they're fantastic. I've watched a lot of interviews with them where they just kind of talk about who they are rather than being like specific to the Critical Role stuff. And each person that I've like learned about, I'm like, wow, they're all just such normal people. I love it.
I could be wrong, but I think Matt, the DM, I think he's the only actual like lifelong nerd, like really into the nerd stuff. I think all the rest of the people who got involved in Critical Role were just voice actors in Hollywood.
Yeah.
And they were friends with Matt, so like, hey, will you run a game for us? And that's really where it started. It's just friends playing around a table.
Right. Just like you said, again, we're not like super familiar with the backstory of these people and how they got together, but I've heard that it really was like they would get to meet like once a month because they were all just so busy, and that once a month would last for like 9 hours, 10-hour sessions.
Jesus Christ.
And so then they would like look forward to these sessions so much. The first ton of their time that they did this, there's no recordings of it.
Oh yeah, they start in the middle.
Right. And I think they'd been playing honestly for like a year and a half.
For a while, yeah. It was Felicia Day who, at least at the time, I think Geek and Sundry was her company.
Right. Yep.
She convinced them to start filming it for Twitch. And they're like, I don't think people are going to want to watch this.
Yeah. And it's just interesting to me because if you only played once a month, or maybe twice a month if you're lucky, but you're playing for like 10 to 12 hours at a time, you're going to be a little chunk into a campaign. Like that's like 20 sessions maybe before they started like really recording, but that was enough to give them established characters. They've leveled up a little bit.
Right.
They're familiar with what they do in a very general sense. So I think that that's pretty fun to like step into that world right then. And
They had a big advantage that Mercer had been DMing since he was in high school too.
right. Oh yeah, I'm sure.
He'd been doing it for a long time, and I know like Marisha and Travis have talked about how he's kind of ruined them on other DMs.
Oh, I'm
now.
I can imagine.
Yeah. So yeah, Critical Role is definitely cool. I'm really happy about what it's done for the hobby.
Yeah.
For sure.
Oh, for sure.
I like that a lot. Whether I like everything they do or not, I'm happy that they exist.
Yeah, there's a lot of the actual play podcasts out there that have gotten bigger that I think that there's a lot that you could really delve into. There's a lot of fun ones like the Glass Cannon.
That's one of my favorites, like for actual play.
Those guys are fucking so great.
The DM's also a comedian, so it helps a lot, but they are really snappy and witty, and they do things like the DM he'll actually say NPCs are played by certain actors. So it's like this NPC comes in and they're played by Michelle Pfeiffer.
Oh, right.
So you get this immediate image of who the NPC is, and
That's fun.
That's great.
I love it.
Glass Cannon is on tour right now.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah.
And I think they're about to roll new characters in a new game. I think they're playing Dune.
I know that the Glass Cannon Network, what do they call it? The Naish. The Glass Cannon Nation.
Oh, right.
They call it the Naish. They have a bunch of different games going on now. Like their YouTube channel's filled with different campaigns.
Yeah, I think they're rolling characters on some live thing or something either today or tomorrow with when they're playing Dune, I believe.
Nice. That'll be cool. Is the DM for the main Glass Cannon thing, is he DMing?
I saw his picture. There was like 6 people, and there were some girls, and I recognized one of them that I see in the Glass Cannon stuff a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And he was one of the players in their Blades thing as well. I don't know what his name is. And then I also saw the guy you're talking about. I saw him in there, and also there's those 3 main dudes from Glass Cannon.
Yeah, there's 6 of them, and then we know the 3 that played in the Blades in the Dark actual play.
So those dudes were pictured in this thing I saw on.
Nice.
So yeah,
Nice.
should be fun.
One thing that's interesting about the Glass Cannon podcast, because I'm listening to the first episodes, which came out in like 2015.
Right.
So they're older, is you can definitely tell they're East Coast because they give their DM so much shit. It's insane. I'm like, I would never stand for this.
Right.
Like so much backseat DMing, because 2, I can't remember his name, but 2 of the players also DM.
Oh, okay.
So you have that weird dynamic where they interject a lot. It's interesting.
Oh, it'll be exciting.
Spanky times.
So, well, yeah. Tell me.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was about to shift gears, hit that clutch.
I know you were. I heard the tone.
But were you gonna do the same, or were you going somewhere else?
I was, but I don't think it was for the same subject.
Oh, let's go with yours then.
I was gonna say. So, did you want to talk about last night's session at all?
Yeah, sure.
No, that means no.
No, there was.
Maybe sure. But
I think that we should. Yeah, last night's session was good. My players. I'm a pretty loose DM when it comes to a lot of stuff, and I really let the players kind of guide certain things, and my planning is malleable. So as players get excited about something and they want to start rolling for things, I let them and say, okay, yeah. And if they do good rolls, then we can veer the story, we can veer this, we can change this, I can change something to make it happen differently because the player decided to do something I didn't expect. And I was like, oh, this is a good moment to change what I was going to do to right here because it fits. So I do that kind of stuff a lot, and that's definitely an Ian DM thing. I don't know if a lot of DMs do that, but it's something I like to do. And in that, some players did some stuff last night that opened up a big part of what's going on in the campaign part that we're playing right now in the second chapter, if you will, of my Forged campaign, where there are these elves and they've been trying to become shards, is what they're called. It's this title, this ambiguous thing, Solve for X.
It's all for X, baby.
Somebody
Need t-shirts for that.
I know. Somebody stumbled onto something, and some of my players really wanted to know what that was, and they really dived into it, and now they're in the thick of it. And I teased one of my characters last night, Raw, who's played by John. And I was like, I think you're going to die next session. And everyone wants to say all this stuff, and I'm really only basing that on I know how you play, and I think that you are going to do something in the next section that's going to get you killed. That's all. I don't know.
Let's delve in a little bit. As you've told me before, like, the likelihood of everybody dying right now is high.
Is high. Oh, yeah.
And I am interested because it seems like you kind of want to kill off all these players. All these characters, rather, not the players. And so I'm interested to know why.
Oh, that's awesome. It's not that I want to kill the characters. I want there to be sacrifice for the goal. I want there to be, if they're going to like succeed in what they can succeed in, I want there to be a sacrifice in order to do that. There needs to be that in my mind for it to feel like you did something.
Gotcha. So paying a heavy price.
Right, exactly. Because the reward, let's call it, is huge for the characters in this game.
Mm-hmm.
So if they just get there and it's like, we didn't have to struggle in any way, shape, or form to get here, it feels weak to me. And I want there to feel like they had to do a bunch of shit and there was a lot of strife and struggle to get there. And once this section's completed, this chapter 2, we'll have like a whole thing we can talk about,
right?
And what I was planning and how it affected this and affected that. And we can freely talk about it because it'll already be established that the characters would know all this stuff.
We should say for the listeners, chapter 2 of Ian's campaign is kind of a dream within a dream type thing.
Right. If any of you have ever played Assassin's Creed, you know that your character is actually in the future and they're playing through memories.
Right.
And that's how they kind of convey to you like you're in these past environments, and when you die it's like, oh, you fell out of sync with the memory and you didn't do what the memory was. Mine's a little bit different than that, but it's the core concept that is happening is they're playing something out that already happened. So it should be good.
Yeah.
I think I'm super excited to see where it goes, especially with the new character, and I think that that's a good lead into the subject of today.
Yes.
What are we talking about today, Eric?
So today we're talking about character death.
Character death.
And we both now experienced some death in our various campaigns. And so it feels like a good time to break it down a little bit, talk about it. Talk about the good things that were handled and the bad things.
Yeah.
Like how could have been done better. And then, of course, what does the hive mind, also known as the internet, have to say about it?
Ooh.
As well.
Delving into that hive mind.
Spoiler alert, it's lots of stuff. It's a lot of things. So I figured a good place to start was, what are the mechanics of death in D&D? How does D&D as a mechanical system of a game handle it? And reading through it, it's kind of weird. And I also read something, again, just like reading through the monster manual again, being like, wow, I didn't register this thing at all.
Really?
Yeah, there's a little snippet that's not really explained that I'm like, what? No one's ever talked about this. Like, none of us know about this, or we've forgotten. So basically, in D&D, your character, whatever it is, let's say it's a ranger or a barbarian or a wizard, they have what's called hit points. And basically this is just, you have a number, and if that number goes to 0, you fall unconscious. Lots of ways to go to 0. Depending upon the D&D you're playing, it can be not so deadly to lethal. It can get really, really deadly. Most games are somewhere in between, I've experienced. So once you fall to 0, you do what's called, it's a special kind of saving throw called a death saving throw. Most of the time we just call it a death save. And basically you roll a naked d20, which means no modifier. You're just rolling the d20 and you're trying to get 10 or higher. If you get 10 or higher, you've made a save, and you have to do that 3 times. You don't have to do it in a row, but you need to save 3 times, and then you stabilize. And we'll talk about what stabilizing is momentarily. If you roll below 10, so 9 or lower, 3 times, you fucking die.
Dead.
You're dead. There are ways to bring characters back, but basically for purposes of game mechanics, you're done.
Mm-hmm.
So if you roll 3 saves, you stabilize, which means you're not dying anymore. You're still at 0, but you're kind of in this limbo state. Your fellow party members, the other characters, can leave you somewhere if they need to deal with combat or something, and you'll be okay. However, if you get hit while you're at 0, that counts as a fail. And I think if you get hit while you're stabilized, it doesn't really explain it in the player's handbook. I think you have to start rolling the saves again.
Oh, really? That would make sense.
I think so, because you're not going to stay stabilized if somebody comes and stabs you with a knife or a sword.
Right.
So here's the other part. First thing we both know, if you roll a 20, so a critical success, it counts as 2 successes.
Mm-hmm.
If you roll a natural 1, a critical fail, it counts as 2 failures. If you roll a 20, you get 1 hit point, which is like, wait, what? Yeah, it literally says it in the PHP. If you roll a 20, you get 1 hit point, which means if you rolled a 20 as your first save, does that mean you suddenly become awake? Because if you have any hit points, you are now considered conscious.
That's what it sounds like to me, man.
Yeah, so it doesn't explain it other than that, but apparently if you roll a 20, you get 1 hit point. Need to do more research on that.
Yeah.
So stabilizing is kind of interesting. If you're stabilized and nobody can heal you, so people can do a medicine check or do first aid to stabilize you, but they might not have a health potion, or they might not have cure wounds or something. You roll a d4, so a 4-sided die, and after that many hours, so let's say you roll a d4, you come up with 3, after 3 hours you gain a hit point.
Oh, cool.
So you'll naturally start to heal a little bit.
Right.
You can also cast Spare the Dying to stabilize creatures, which I believe Luthien, Ian's old character, has done quite a bit.
Yep.
Yeah.
I have done Spare the Dying quite a bit.
And it's kind of considered bad form unless you talk about it, but as a DM, I can have my monsters go after unconscious players and kill them, or at least have them fail more of their saves. I honestly kind of assumed it was you kill them outright. If you hit them, you kill them, but it makes more sense mechanically that no, you just fail one of your saves automatically. So you get stabbed, you're bleeding, you're not dead, but you're bleeding out, is the idea. And that's it. There's not much more to it. There are a bunch of spells if you do die that will bring you back from the dead. So Revivify, Raise Dead, Resurrection, Reincarnate, True Resurrection, and then the infamous Wish spell.
Right.
Which, love it or hate it, it is what it is.
What's interesting to me is you talking about this, like getting hit while you're unconscious. I actually witnessed that in a Critical Role episode.
Oh, did you?
Where, like, there was someone unconscious and they had, like, taunted the enemy at some point. So they went after this unconscious character. And as it happened, they said basically what you were talking about.
Right.
All of a sudden, they were like, okay, you're down a death save now. And I was like, wait, what?
Yeah.
And then hearing you say that and, like, referencing that, I'm like, oh, that makes sense to me. Like,
yeah.
Okay. Also, if you get hit really hard and it takes you down to 0 hit points, and then the remaining damage takes you negative to what your hit points are, but in the negative, that will also kill you instantly.
Right. And one thing I should say is that I think that's an optional rule,
Right.
or it's from prior editions. You can definitely do that in 5e, but I don't think it's not in the PHP.
It's not in the PHP. All right, that
No.
makes sense.
But I think that's a cool rule for high level play,
Yeah.
where if your character has 200 hit points, if you get hit for 300 damage, you die.
Yeah.
I think that's cool. But again, depends on who's playing, because some people could get really upset by that.
Right. Especially at a high level character.
At a high level character, you put all this time in, unless you're playing a one shot
Right.
or something, you know. Now there are some, I'm going to jump forward a little bit, but there are some interesting solutions to people who don't like death in D&D, because there's a whole sub community of people who don't use death at all in their games. They might hand wave it or have some way where they just barely get out, or they just go unconscious. I think it's a bit of a cop-out to have no death, but that's just me. But I do like the idea of, if you want to keep the character, instead of them dying, they suffer a permanent injury instead. So maybe their leg becomes lamed, or they have a really vicious scar in their face, depending upon where they got hit, that kind of thing.
Right.
It's in the DMG somewhere. I didn't have time to look at it, but permanent injuries are an optional rule that you can add. So that's interesting. Completely removing it, I feel like it's really easy to suddenly just erase all the meaning around death. There's no more stakes for the players. The risk feels very, very low, and D&D sings when there's risk. So it's based around this kind of risk reward mechanic, you know.
Oh yeah, for sure.
That's it.
Yeah.
There's nothing else. It's
Well, there's a little thing right here talking about this is like how Eric's saying there's ways around death, but there's something that was introduced in one of the books, in the Wildmount books, called a Hollow One. And Hollow Ones are kind of like undead without being undead.
So it's kind of like the Revenant.
Kind of, yeah. So like you can bring characters back as Hollow Ones, and they're still who they are, but there's just some certain aspects to their character that'll be a bit different.
Right.
For damage purposes and rule purposes, they are considered undead. But they're not undead in the sense that they can't be, they can't talk, or they don't, they're not friendly or something. They're not all of a sudden evil. They're just, for the sake of rules, they're undead. So,
right.
And I thought that was interesting when I saw that. As a way to like, oh, I mean, if someone really did love their character and they die, you could do that. You could have them somehow come back as a Hollow One, if you want to include that in your game.
It seems campaign specific, because, for instance, in my campaign on Mondays, it would be really hard to have, like, if they wanted to bring a character back, it would be hard to build a quest for them to go do that, because the stakes are so high and they're on this track.
Right. Oh, yeah, for sure.
So if, we'll get to it, but one of my characters died. If he wanted to keep playing that character, a Revenant type idea would make sense. There's other hand-wavy ways to do it, but
yeah,
that would make sense for sure. I mean, the part on death is maybe 7 paragraphs in the PHP. So for something that can be fairly traumatic for players, there's not a lot that D&D actually has to say from a mechanical standpoint.
Yeah, and death of a character, to me, is kind of a big deal. Having the first character in our group to die was an interesting experience. So that was something that was like, I mean, do you want to talk?
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that? Let's talk about that.
Let's dive into it.
So my character Luthien died. It was a brutal death, because to me, it felt like nothing.
Let's interject really quick. This was from the Conan campaign.
Yes.
Do you have a character right now? Are you playing in a campaign, or are you only DMing?
I am currently only DMing.
Right. Okay.
I mean,
you're helping me out, but you're not like a PC.
But I'm not like a PC in that.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, right now, currently, I do not have a character that I'm playing. And I never actually thought about that till you said that, so that's weird.
I didn't either.
Yeah.
I just realized, I was like, wait, is he playing?
Yeah,
nope,
I'm not a player in anything right now, just DM.
Living the dream.
So to me, when I was killed, at the moment that it happened, I was upset that I was killed over that.
You're upset for a while.
Yeah, it felt cheap to me. I felt like I was robbed of a cool death, which, yeah, I know sometimes death isn't cool, and that, sometimes a character will fall over something dumb. I get that. But the campaign that we were playing in, this epic campaign of battle and glory, it felt really cheap to just fucking fry me on some encounter with a god that didn't really fit for me. Now, the DM may say it does fit and have his whole opinion on that, and that is what it is.
And he'll get a chance to come on and actually
defend himself.
Yeah. For sure.
Don't get me wrong. I love
Here's,
John.
I mean, there's a couple things that I'm just going to add to what you said. Is you didn't get a chance to do death saves.
Nope.
It's a disintegration spell, so if you go to 0, you're gone. There's no body. You turn into dust and you're out.
Yep.
And so right there's no agency where you get a say in or any kind of input into this character dying.
Mm-hmm.
The second was the Great Mother, which was the beast we were fighting, is basically the god of the beholders, which is really cool, but it had nothing to actually do with the campaign we were playing. It was basically a homebrew element that we weren't prepared for in any way.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the other thing, is we walk through a door, we're having this boss battle, we're unprepared, and it also doesn't have anything to do with our quest.
Right.
So to me, that added to the wait a minute, what's going on?
Right.
What is this?
Totally.
You know?
Yeah, there was no, I don't know. It really felt discouraging to be killed like that with nothing. It's like, oh, well, this is D&D. That's what the dice did. That's what this did. And it's like, yeah, okay.
Right.
Cool. I guess that's how we will deal with player death in this campaign.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like we had talked about it yet. We were so new when we started to this. We had never established the idea of a character death and what we will do about that.
We hadn't needed to.
Yeah.
Yeah. It wasn't a thing.
And then it happened, and it felt bad at first.
Mm-hmm.
It felt really bad. Especially, my character was dead. I was disappointed by that, but, you move on because it happened. And I went back and forth with my DM trying to figure out how we wanted to address this, what's next.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm an impatient person when it comes to certain things.
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit. When it comes to the Friday night game, when we're playing D&D, I don't want to be sitting there for 3 sessions while our DM figures out how to bring me back into the game.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to sit there for that. I'll sit for a session or 2.
Right.
But this is my Friday night thing. This is what I like to do to unwind. And you killed me for no reason, and now you don't have a way to bring me back into the game.
Mm-hmm.
Not my character, but me as Ian. You don't have a way to bring my a character
Mm-hmm.
into the thing. So I came up with a way to do that, and then I had to go back and forth with my DM because he didn't want to do it this way, he didn't want to do it that way, he didn't feel this way, he didn't feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
And he wanted, it seemed, to make my team go resurrect me
Mm-hmm.
as the same person. I was like, no, that's stupid. I don't want to do that. So, I mean, to me, just as kind of my final thought to say about that death is make sure that you talk about these things before it happens. Because when it happens,
Right.
if you haven't planned for it, it can be discouraging.
And if you don't know how to plan for it, stop and take some time to talk about it when it happens.
Absolutely.
That's totally okay to do. I know for me, after a blowout that I've talked about on other episodes in one of my campaigns, I came up with the timeout rule where if you have a problem or you want to deal with something, you're just like, okay, time out, let's talk about this.
Mm-hmm. So on that death... sorry.
I was just going to say, what do you feel like, what was the takeaway or the learning, if anything else, the learning experience from that, the lesson from...
The lesson from my first character death was... I'm going to give you the lesson as a whole, rather not
Mm-hmm.
focusing in on the negative of it, but after everything was said and done,
Mm-hmm.
the lesson I learned was hold on to your characters tightly, but be prepared just like you would a loved one or anybody, that they can die. That character, that person can die. Right. And to let go of that moment when it does happen, because it can truly lead to a lot of really cool experiences on the table.
Definitely.
Overall, it was not handled well, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
But in the end, we found a way to make it good, to make it feel good.
Right.
Again, come back to the table even when you're upset. And I'm not saying I left the table. I'm just saying if it does upset you and you feel the urge to walk away,
Mm-hmm.
Take a breath, take a minute if you need to, and come back to the table, because you never know what amazing thing you're going to create next.
For sure.
What do you think, as a person that witnessed this? What was your takeaway on that moment?
Well, I knew once the battle started, because we went through this door. It wasn't like we went through a door into like a big room. We went through a door into a different dimension. And once we went in, we were in there for like a whole session.
Mm-hmm.
I knew we weren't coming out of that unscathed, and I knew my character wasn't coming out of it unchanged. That was the cool thing to me when all was said and done, is since it was so unsatisfying, the players unconsciously took it upon themselves to give it weight.
Mm.
So like my character, basically we got out of there and he just walked off into the darkness. Like he just snapped. It wasn't even I'm out. He didn't know what to do because Luthien is gone. And they were kind of two peas in a pod, their characters. And then, about half the party changed at that point.
Yep.
What happened to Luthien affected their characters. And so they're like, it doesn't feel right to keep playing this character in this way. And so that was the cool thing, is the players taking initiative intuitively to make it work and make sense for the party. My thing was it was an example of rules harming the story in terms of, well, this is what happened, so that's what we're going to go with, is not a satisfying way to handle it in that case. When it's something where you were like level 17?
Mm-hmm.
This character you've taken from 1 to 17 is just out like that. It's extremely unsatisfying for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my thing, is rulings, not rules, I think is a really good piece of advice. And that's straight from the DMG.
Right.
Basically, it's just, hey, even if this is the rules, it doesn't mean that's what you have to do if it's not making sense for what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
When all is said and done, I'm really glad that it happened, just because of what we've talked about many times.
Yeah.
Is, one of my favorite characters came out of Pock leaving and me building something else,
Yeah.
The big takeaway for me as a DM was, don't throw a giant boss at your party and not prepare them at all. Unless that makes sense in the campaign, but otherwise don't just throw a giant monster in because it's a giant monster. Like, give them context, give them a way to solve the problem. So if they're going to fight the God of Beholders, have them maybe fight some Beholders before that.
Mm-hmm.
Give it some context and verisimilitude in the world.
Right.
I don't have a problem fighting the God of Beholders, but it felt so out of it was like when we fought demons the first time.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it was just like, what? Where is this coming from?
Right.
Like, what does this have to do with what we're doing? And maybe it does, and we just don't know. Like, maybe the DM has plans, but that's not how it felt on the player-facing side of things.
Right. Oh, for sure. For sure.
So that would be my takeaways from it.
I think I like that. I mean, I think that what you're saying makes sense, and hopefully people listening can go, oh, okay. All right.
Right.
When they're planning their own sessions or things, or like maybe one of your characters has died and you didn't handle it well, and hearing this will be like, oh, okay, here's a way we could do that.
Right.
And I also think that lends us to when we had to deal with character deaths after that.
Mm-hmm.
So we had this certain experience with this, and then a character death happening in another campaign kind of changes like your perspective. And I think that you would have the next situation, being a DM, I believe.
Yeah. So on the Monday campaign, this happened a few weeks ago, and I was going to talk about it sooner, but it worked out because now we're doing an episode on it.
Yeah.
My friend Paul, who plays in the Shadow of Ao campaign, which is the Monday campaign, we play every other week generally. Sometimes it's less than that if we have to cancel a week or reschedule. Sometimes it's 2 weeks in between sessions. His character Rist, he was very homebrewed, but he had some warlock in there, and he had some different stuff. It was very piecemeal and catered to his interests. He died super randomly because he got knocked unconscious. He was down during a battle. And I've talked about the battle before where they were fighting priests, and a lot of those priests were minions. But there were a couple real toughies in there, and Rist just kept getting hit. He was like right in the middle, kept taking it, fell unconscious, and then Paul walked away from his computer because we play on Roll20, and this is very important because he walked away enough where he had to roll, I think, 2 of his death saves in a row, and that's what killed him because he rolled a 1.
Right, I remember.
Yeah, and it was like, record scratch moment because it was so unexpected. And I was very affected for the rest of that session. It was super heavy. I don't even know where it came from, but I had this idea that to stop everything and just have like 30 seconds of silence, just a moment of silence for the character, since you want their death to have some weight to it, because this is something that somebody spent a lot of time and care to create, and also most of the time weekly, you know, they play this character, they put the skin of this character on, so to speak, and live, you know, see the world through their eyes to more or less of an extent. And so it was my idea just to have, you know, everybody just take a second and let's give a moment for this character's passing. Because for me, these characters are important to us, even if it's just our group or it's just the person who made it. You spent a lot of time and effort on that character, and that character has reality to you. If you play for a while, it's going to have reality to the other people who play, like a shared hallucination almost.
Absolutely.
And when they die, it can affect you emotionally in a deep, deep way. So we did that. And then we actually had, once the battle was over, like a little funeral for Rist, where they buried him on this hill just outside of this broken, ruined castle. And, you know, I just said there was a hill with a tree and they buried him, and I let all the characters say kind of a eulogy almost, letting the characters talk about Rist. And it was actually very poignant. It was a nice little, it was really heavy, but it felt right for that group and for that character. There were a couple of characters, John, his character, he has a dwarf barbarian, and Jerry, who played, so the dwarf barbarian's name was Cramdar, or is Cramdar, he's still alive. And Jerry plays a halfling rogue whose name is Pitt. And they really didn't like Rist. Not the players, but the characters. There was a lot of conflict, and it kind of resolved that conflict. Mm-hmm. They remember him fondly now, which I thought was interesting and unexpected.
Oh, I loved it. So unexpected.
Yeah. So that is my thoughts right there.
So as somebody I'm not playing in that campaign, but I observe it each week, mm-hmm. because I play a villain in a sense. Mm-hmm. And to see that happen when the character died, it was shocking. And it felt so brutal at that moment. And it felt like there was weight to it. And then as Eric allowed the 30 seconds of time to pass in silence, I feel like it really tuned everybody into what had just happened. And I'm not going to lie, there was emotion in the air. Like, it felt mm-hmm. like a friend had just been killed. And it was super brutal to watch, like each of these characters kind of like bury their friend and have a little moment. And like Eric's saying, the two characters that kind of had clashes with that character, mm-hmm. it was, I don't know, it felt real in the sense of at the table.
Right.
It meant something that this character died, even though the moment when they died, it was just a battle, you know? Mm-hmm. And they failed their death saves, so it was like, okay, this is what's happening. And it felt, you know, it was such a different experience seeing a death of a character handled like this than what we had previously seen. Mm-hmm. And it inspired me to think about that if I ever kill a character as a DM, to make sure that it was handled in a way that was special. It's important.
Right. For
a character to die is, you know, it's an important thing. Just like you're saying, you put love into these characters, and you know, sometimes there will be I'm getting all choked up about it.
Choke it up, brother. Choke it up.
Well, yeah, because you don't expect a character to die, and when they do, you know, we love playing these games, so we invest in them. We invest in our people. We invest in our characters.
Right.
And it really felt like you honored the time and energy that was put into that character, and I loved it. It was such a powerful moment.
Thanks, man.
So it opened my eyes to that same thing, and I tried to carry that same idea into my own campaigns going forward of, when a character dies.
Yeah. And the moment of silence thing, it definitely gives it weight because you can use fidgeting or sound or words to kind of cover up the discomfort of what's going on. And taking that away really lends weight to, wow, this is kind of uncomfortable, which feels stupid because this is a fictional character that we made up and it's not supposed to matter. But, this game is important, at least to us.
Yeah.
And it seems to be important to a lot of people now because more people are playing it than ever. And, stories are important to us.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, I agree. I almost started crying during it. It was heavy for me, and I'm pretty good at pretending like I'm not emotional. So I made it through, but yeah, it was pretty hefty for sure.
Yeah. And I think that there was another death as well that happened after that one.
Yeah. This one wasn't, strictly speaking, a character death at this point.
Right.
And this one takes a little more explanation. So there's only 4 PCs, but there were originally 6, and 2 of the players have left the table, I will say, for personal reasons, and we don't need to get into that. And Lindsay, and shout out to Lindsay because she actually listens to the podcast. So
shout out to Lindsay.
Shout out Lindsay. I had been talking to her just hey, I'm still using your character. I'm trying to respect the character as best I can, but there is a chance that she could die, and I just want you to know that so you're aware. Her character's name is Drea, and Drea had been taken hostage by the side that the PCs are fighting against. And usually they're called the Way. So it's the Way followers or the followers of the Way, and they are working for this new god that has emerged and is throwing the world into chaos, and they're kidnapping all the gods and things like that. And my PCs had this dream that Drea was in this certain town. She was being tortured, and they're flying to Baldur's Gate, and they see this town, and they just know she's there. And so they didn't have to go there, but it was pretty compelling to go there. And I had been warning the characters that, hey, look, the stakes are going to get higher. And it's going to get harder, and the chance of dying is going to get higher. So I've been slowly turning up the heat on the water. So the water's starting to boil now, and the players are starting to realize, oh, shit. Because when I started, I was very sensitive to not killing characters. So even in the Sunday campaign, one of our characters, she failed all her death saves, and we found a way around it and got her back in. Because it felt too awful. It was too new. There were too many sparkles in my eyes about D&D at that point. So they got into the town. Of course, they planned in a way I didn't predict. So how they entered the town, and they were caught. They were spotted, and Drea was pulled out. The PCs didn't handle it there was no negotiating. They tried to go in there, and Drea was killed as a result. So it was a situation of put down your weapons or your friend gets it. And they didn't. And if you DM and you listen to this, you're probably laughing because there's 2 things players hate, and it's giving up their stuff. So if they get taken hostage, if you take their stuff away, that's a big no-no. Players hate it. And the other one is surrendering. That's not a thing they like doing. So it may sound a little naive, but the story I'm trying to tell is about what happens when you get power taken away, and how do you deal with overwhelming odds, if you want to talk about themes. So it's supposed to be a little more complex, but it was presented, I felt like I said as much as I could, and then they just barreled into it. And Cramdar is a barreler, so every situation he's been in, there's no negotiating, there's no nothing, he's just in it.
Yep.
And so maybe I should have known a little better, but she died, and that one was even worse for me because it was just she was done, and it was again kind of the disintegration thing. The enemy has these things that I'm not going to explain because I know my players listen now.
Yeah.
So they have special weapons, that's all I'll say. So that one was really heavy, and I'm still talking through it with players. So I've talked to Jerry, and I'm going to have some conversations with everybody because I feel like it was pretty heavy for me and for them. So it feels like a good time to be hey, let's check in. How are you feeling about the campaign? Are you frustrated? Let's talk about things. A takeaway for me from that one is even if you feel like you've explained things as best you can, the players probably don't know what you think they know or what you feel like they should.
Right. Oh, for sure.
So like I feel like I had laid down all these clues, but it's becoming apparent to me that that wasn't obvious. So that's on me as a DM. Also that my players think in terms of kill or be killed or friend versus enemy. So again, that's a very dualistic thinking where I'm trying to get more ambiguous in terms of what's going on. And also letting hard consequences play out. Like if it happens, if this is what the players do, it's okay to not hand wave it as a DM. Okay, you made this choice. This is what's going to happen. Even if I, as Eric, as a DM, I don't want that to happen.
Right.
That was not what I wanted to happen. And you think about it, how many movies are there where it's like, weapons down, or your friend gets it, and they're like, okay.
Right.
You know. But Gramdar had the, we do not negotiate with terrorists
Right.
type of idea. So that's been my takeaway from that. That one I'm still processing a little bit.
Yeah.
That one was really brutal for me. That was a hard session.
Oh, it was. I even felt it on that session. It was intense.
Mm-hmm.
And an interesting perspective I may be able to add to any of this. I don't know about interesting.
It's always interesting when you're saying it.
They, just like you're saying, you let these consequences play out that you may not have even wanted to do.
Right.
And your players may have the sense of, oh, if I would have known that, I wouldn't have done that.
Right.
To me, that's like, how many times in life, if you could have known something before it happened, you wouldn't have done that? Well, yeah. No one wants to pay the price for something that they didn't know.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, of course, any of you listening would be like, well, you were just bitching, Ian, about something kind of similar to that where you didn't know and you did it and the consequences. But yeah, this is the perspective of somebody that went through something that was horrible to me.
To me, it makes sense. So, for instance, if your enemy is kidnapping the gods, for instance, they kidnap Drea, but they don't kill her.
Oh, yeah.
They hold her hostage. And then all my heroes have the essence of a deity within them.
Yeah.
Why would the enemy want to kill you? But again, not obvious, right? Obvious to me, but not obvious to them.
Uh-huh.
And it's also very apparent, especially from last night's session, that my fellow players don't understand the difference between investigation and insight, and they never use insight, and they really should.
Right.
Because there's a lot of metagaming going on in all the campaigns right now when insight is specifically to detect the intent of an NPC or fellow PC. That's what it's for, to read body language and tone of voice. It is completely different than investigation.
Oh, yeah.
And investigation is completely different than perception. So any of our fellow players listening, know that.
Yeah.
Look it up. Those are different skills used for different things.
And going into that, and I agree with what I want to definitely parse this to you, and maybe that's the wrong word, but I agree. I've been a witness of the Monday campaign.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think I've maybe not watched like one, maybe two episodes.
Maybe one.
And the rest of them I've been either like, sometimes they don't see my camera, like, because I'm doing stuff, but I'm listening to
But you're
it.
listening. Yeah.
And
for sure.
as a DM and as a player, it felt to me like you had explained so much, so many times that like lethality has increased.
Mm-hmm.
You know, to me, it felt like you had definitely done as much as you could as a DM to explain it to them without just flat out telling them certain things, which, you know, again, like you said, that's on us to figure out as DMs.
Mm-hmm.
But I felt that it was good.
Well, I appreciate that.
It felt, again, like this is a consequence for your actions. This is literally how a game can play out. Like, you did this, here's the consequence.
And this is a metagame thing, but my players should know, unless we've stated that this is the campaign we're going to play, I'm never going to just try to outright kill you. I'm never going to put you in a situation where my intent is to overwhelm you with forces just to murder your characters.
Right.
And that was kind of the feedback I got was, oh, well, obviously he's just trying to kill us. Like,
What
are you talking about? Do you know me? Like, we've been playing this campaign for almost a year and a half now. So I talked to Jerry, and he's like, yeah, it was frustrating to like not win, but he still enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think all in all, it's good, but it was hard.
Oh,
that was probably the hardest session of that campaign that we've done. It was brutal.
That makes sense to me. And I think that also, you just said it a minute ago, and I think we should talk about that. unless you have anything extra you'd like to talk about.
No, please.
So in my Forged campaign, we had a character death last week, and I might get like choked up about this, so I apologize.
Do it, brother. It's okay. This is a safe space.
So I've said this before, but there's a whole calendar kind of happening in my campaign currently.
Mm-hmm.
And as my players have been progressing, I've let them know that it's going to get more lethal.
Mm-hmm.
Some characters are leaning more into things. Some characters are fighting that idea. And I went to try and kill an NPC.
Mm-hmm.
This was already planned. I was going to do it. The players interrupted that by being in a certain area, and they were given other information. So they went to go stop or to go figure something out. And as they step into this area, Eric's character, Vash, his mother character, who's, his grandma, had been taken.
Mm-hmm.
And he rushed after that character immediately.
Mm-hmm.
No questions, no thoughts. And it was perfect for how Eric had been playing that character, which I loved. But it also made me nervous because I was like, uh-oh. I don't know what he's going to do. Like, is he going to catch up to this situation, like, unfolding? Like, what's going to happen?
Mm-hmm.
So he bails super quick, and he's just running after these people that have taken his mother figure. And the rest of the characters find out that, and they're, like, right behind Vash. They're, not with him, but they're right behind him.
Mm-hmm.
Vash stumbles onto this battle, and he can see his grandmother up there, and a big battle ensues with everybody, and my players are gangsters, and they really tried their best to stop me from doing what I was going to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then Vash died,
Mm-hmm.
trying to save her. And he did save her.
He did. He was successful in that, for sure.
Yeah. And then he used the last of his life to save everybody at that
Mm-hmm.
moment. And just like Eric had done, I didn't want Vash to die right then. I wanted Vash to die later. But Eric plays a certain way, and he really loves to be his characters. That if he loves his character, he's going to play it. Even if the choice seems crazy, he's like, no, that's what my character would do. I know it.
Mm-hmm.
And he followed through with that. And after he died, sacrificed himself, we had, just like Eric had done, we did the moment of silence.
Mm-hmm.
And watching my players, I feel like a lot of them kind of like switched into that mode right when that happened, when we had that 30 seconds of silence to mourn the loss of this character.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had kind of like, instead of a burial, we had a whole nother thing where each character got to kind of have a moment to say goodbye. And it there were some moments
Mm-hmm.
that totally like hit me right in the heart. And these are, characters that I created for these people, for my friends, and it really touched my heart to see them pick these characters up and like be emotionally tied to them. And
Right.
I did my best to honor the fall of the character. And it's hard. Like when you kill a character, you don't mean to. You're trying to, but you're not trying to. Like you want them to feel threatened.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then one dies and you're like, oh my God. And I'd like, as it happened, I was holding back for like sobbing because I was like, oh my God, what did I do? But again, this is like another one of those moments that I want to hear your perspective and your thoughts on
Sure.
how that I handled the character death, coming from now that I've seen deaths happen in these campaigns and been killed in a campaign.
Mm-hmm.
Let me hear your perspective. If you want to tell like how your character died and all that, that's cool with me.
So I'm going to back up a little bit with Vash
Yeah.
and just give some background to why he made the choices he made. So we had made other characters, and Ian's campaign was a certain thing. And then, unbeknownst to me, I think you were a little frustrated with your original Forge campaign. Like you felt like it wasn't what you wanted it to be. And so you started to rework it and, in tandem with learning more about D&D and that kind of thing. I could be wrong about that, but that's the impression I get.
You are correct.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a little bit more nuanced, but as what you're saying, yes.
Okay. So we got into this dream within dream thing, And I honestly, it's still not my favorite thing when other people make my characters. And so Ian's like, I made these characters. And I was like, really? Like, this is what we're doing? Okay, whatever. Fine, let's do it. But then we played like one session and then we took a bunch of time off. Like where we finished the Conan campaign and we didn't play Forge for, I think, like a month and a half. It was a while.
Yeah, it was like 5 or 6 weeks.
But I had a ton of fun playing that character. And so I started really getting into building his backstory and figuring out who this character was because I really liked playing him. And he basically came from like this abusive childhood where his parents sold him off for drugs, and he grew up fighting in the arena, so this kind of gladiatorial environment, which is not great for a child, elf or human or whatever, to grow up in. And Zaz, the grandmother character that Ian was talking about, was the only character that showed him kindness, the only other person in his life. So Zaz takes precedence over everything for Vash. So if she's in trouble, nothing else matters. The only analogy I have is in the second Matrix movie, Neo makes this choice to save Trinity rather than save the world, because that's how important Trinity is. So he chooses love over specific love over like platonic love in that movie. And that's kind of, I mean, Vash isn't in love with his grandma, but she's the one true family that he has. So when she was under threat, when we got to the village where she was at, and Ian's like, yeah, our house is burned down. Like, I didn't have to think about it. I already had all that built where I knew exactly what Vash was going to do. And it was interesting because I didn't make the character. My attachment to the character is different, where I'm more willing to lean into just playing that character. I'm less worried about having bad consequences. So I was like, well, this is what he would do. We have kind of this special pool of power called focus. If we're out of focus, we can take on exhaustion to basically get more, basically spend focus that we don't have. So I think I was like 3 levels of exhaustion deep when I got to where she was, and there was like 40 tokens on the map. Like there was a bunch of these infected elves and monsters and stuff, and she was at the top of the hill. And so I just used his class to get up there, and his only priority was getting her out of there. Nothing else mattered. And when it came time, because he actually was successful, Zazli is still alive in the campaign. Ian was like, you have the chance to do something big right now if you want to, like in the moment of death, which I think is another cool thing. Like letting your players describe how their character goes out heroically, I think is a cool way to respect that character. There's this whole idea of the life force and what Ian calls the vault, and it's basically just kind of the underlying structure of the world. I don't want to say too much, but I thought about that and how all the players had recent experiences with coming into contact with this, and the shards that Ian has talked about are connected to this place. And so I was like, what if he was able to connect with that and just draw power into him and then basically act like a radiant bomb? So he just filled up with radiant energy and then it exploded out and took out all the enemies in heroic fashion. And then I added in this little cool thing, which was they discovered it later because some of the players weren't there, is another thing we should say.
Right.
But I had this image, if it was a movie, as they were walking away, you saw this one little blade of grass kind of sprout from the ground, which was supposed to symbolize Vash had gone back to the earth. He was part of the life force, a la Final Fantasy.
Yeah.
It was my first character death that I've experienced. And, I really felt like death can be used as a poignant story moment. Doesn't necessarily move the plot along, it can, but it can be a point to really put focus on to what your characters are doing, because a lot of times after a while, maybe it's been a few weeks since you played and you sit down and play and you're like, okay, what are we doing? What's happening?
Right.
I know we're kind of going towards a thing to do some stuff, so it's a really good way to punctuate and bring focus to what's happening and remember that your characters aren't invulnerable. It was different for me because I didn't build the character. That was a different experience. And I also got emotional about it when it happened. You could feel it in the air. I didn't expect that. And I think that's a big takeaway is you don't know how you're actually going to react to a character dying until you have one die.
Yep.
Like you might feel fine and then it happens and you're like, oh my God,
Oh yeah.
Those are my takeaways. I knew something was coming.
Mm-hmm.
I knew for the whole session, somebody's going to die. And I'm like, if it's Vash, it's Vash. I made peace with it, and I had the freedom to let that character act like they would act. You know what I mean?
I do, yeah. And as a GM or DM or whatever you want to say, the way that played out was epic to me. Like, it felt weighted, like the whole thing, that whole experience, because I was trying to kill somebody that was not a player. But the player, Eric specifically, his character was like, no,
Right.
I'm not letting that happen. I'm going to do everything. Even if I die, this character is going to do everything to stop that. And I loved that. Like, the whole reason I created these characters was to make, not really specifically Eric, but make my friends think outside of the boxes that they've continually played into. And Eric surprised me even more because I had created something I thought he would enjoy, but he really like grabbed that character and made Vash. Like, I just made a simple thing, and you made that character very, very unique. And everyone in the group has made their character different than I've almost imagined, but at the same time still in line with it.
Right.
So last thing I guess I would say is that the communication and the way that we've learned through D&D and playing, and it felt to me like a worthy moment. It felt like a story point. It felt like it was supposed to happen almost.
Right.
If that makes sense. And it was good. It was good.
It felt like a natural outcome of where things were going, and I think too, just us talking about it now, me as a player, I like the idea of self-sacrifice for my characters, where if you're really, and again, I'm the fiction first guy, so I'm not really worried about optimizing to the nth degree. I like optimizing and I like making a good character, but I like this idea that your character is their own thing, and they're going to make choices that make sense to them, even if it's not what me as Eric would do, and that may lead to them getting killed or getting harmed or something. And it was a nice way for Vash to go out, that he saved his friends, and he did do what he wanted to do.
Yeah.
That was the big thing, is he did save Zosley when the god of the world didn't intend that to happen.
Right.
There's the metagame level to it where her fate was pretty much sealed.
Oh, it was. She was going down, and my players stopped that, and I love that. Like, it was awesome to me. And
here's the other thing, is that I started rolling really well. All of a sudden, like, my rolls were super good. I did everything that I intended to do, and it's superstitious, but it feels like, the dice favor players leaning into their character. That's what it felt like subjectively.
Right.
The dice gods approve of this role playing,
Yeah. My closing thought about character death is this: as a GM or as a player, be ready, because you never know when it's going to happen.
Right. Your player could roll really bad. I've seen it happen twice where a player doing death saves has rolled a 1. They've already failed once, and that's 2 fails on top of it. And everyone's suddenly like, what? Just like in real life, you never know when your character is going to go. It's more fulfilling when you lean into your characters, even though at first it's really uncomfortable and it can be terrifying. It's much more fulfilling when you're like, I really played that character the way they wanted to be played.
So lean in. Lean in.
So I think it's good to think about, how, as a DM, for the listeners out there, how do you handle death, or how do you think death should be handled? Because again, it's going to come down to what works for your table and not necessarily our table. And it could be different, especially old school DMs. Like, they want to kill their players.
Right.
It's almost a different game in terms of the relationship between the players and the PCs, and that's completely acceptable in my opinion.
Oh, yeah.
Death can be so meaningful. So what does death mean in D&D if there isn't death? And we may have talked about that at the beginning, but there are certain, there are those in the community at large where they don't have any player death. Like, their players can't die. And I've heard some people say it takes away any tension. Some people say it's really helpful for their players. So I've even heard of DMs who won't kill their players without the player's permission, which is kind of like, all right. I mean, if that's what you want to do. But I feel like the point of death is that it's not up to the players completely. It's not their choice. They have say with the death rolls, but it's not like I'm going to sit down with Ian and be like, okay, thinking about killing your character tonight. Is that okay with you? That's not how I envision it running.
There's some stuff to chew on for all you listeners. If you have thoughts, please share them with us.
Yes.
Like, share, subscribe. Let us know.
Like, share, subscribe.
Share it with friends you think will enjoy it.
We're really interested where people are listening to it.
Oh, that's true.
Where are you taking the podcast in at?
We have a Facebook page. You can talk to us there. There's an Instagram page. You can talk to us there. Yeah. One of us is going to be there, so if you hit us up, we'll answer you.
We'll see it. Yeah.
With that, unless you have anything you'd like to tell me.
No, I think that's a good place to stop. But love you, brother.
I love you, brother.
Love playing this game.
I am so grateful to be doing this and to be playing this with you on the regular, because it is so much fun.
Yeah, it's awesome. For sure.
So all of you listeners out there, stay sweaty.
Stay sweaty and stay alive. Oh, hi. Look at you listening all the way to the end. You know what? I think that deserves a level up. So go ahead. You level up with your bad self. And if you like what we do, please share it with your fellow humans. We love doing this podcast, and we'd love to have more people listening. We have a link tree in the description that links to all the links that are linked therein and forthwith. Also, Jerry did our badass music, and what you hear is only the tip of the iceberg. You can check out all his notes and scales and chords at theplayercharacter.com. Well, that's all for Meow. Remember to roll high and take a point of inspiration. Like, share, subscribe.